Hi students, it's Mrs. Burkhart and I want to run through some tricks and some ideas for how to improve this image. It has a little bit of grain. It looks like it was shot at a high ISO. There's a lot of graininess here. The tone needs a little more contrast and you have this pesky clamp showing in the photo. So let's begin. I think the first thing I'm going to do is what I did in the last tutorial, and I'll run through it again. Let's first of all try and improve the sharpness of this photo by doing Command J and just duplicating this background layer. Next, Filter, Other, High Pass, and I set mine at 5 and click OK. Next, blend back over your original in overlay, and let's look at the before and after. You get just a little bit of clarity, and we're not going to keep all of that clarity, but it really helps bring their eyes and faces into focus. Next, let's soften. Try and get rid of some of this grittiness in here caused by the high ISO. So we'll click back on the background layer, Command J, duplicate it, and we'll do what we did last time, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Now that's way too much blur, so we'll bring it down. Make sure preview is checked so that you can see the effect as you're blurring. That looks pretty good. We're softening that up a little bit. Okay. Next, if we go up here and I turn this on and off, we get a little bit of sharpening. We need to block the blur in some areas because this blur is pretty intense. So I'm going to click on the blurred layer, and it's always good to label. So I'm going to just label it blurred so that I remember that's what that is, and add a layer mask and just go in with our brush and make sure it's black, small diameter, and let's just start, maybe 100%. Go in first and do the areas we know we'll want to have in focus. Eyes, and again I'm using my right bracket. Noses, mouths, especially eyes and mouths, you're going to want to have in focus. Then I would bring my opacity way down and get a bigger brush and maybe just go over parts of the faces, the neck, the skin, the parts that you might want a little bit of fabric in sharper focus. We're just trying to soften this grittiness in here. And we're getting there. It's not all the way better yet, but we are definitely getting there. The next thing I'm going to try is to create a black and white layer over this layer. In the last lesson I did that, and that really gives us a nice contrast. So let's go ahead and create black and white. You can go with the default or go and change some of those values if you want. The real value in this is when you blend it back with either soft light or overlay. And if you look in here, you can see that we're really starting to get rid of that area of the neck. I'm going to go to overlay. It's a little more intense, and I'm starting to become really pleased, although I have lost all the detail in her hair. So I'm going to go back with a brush and maybe just with, I don't know, 50% is good, and just go in and block some of the black and white effect. I will bring a little color, but I'll also bring back some of the texture in their hair. I don't want to go near this area though, because that's where some of that horrible high ISO was lurking. So I could play around with this. That's looking a lot better. The next thing that I would do is think about this background. And we already have several layers, so I probably should have corrected for this clamp right away, but we can still go back. I'm going to go back to this original background layer, and there's a tool called the clone tool, and it's right here, the clone stamp tool. And if you hover near it, you want to brush about the size of the area you're trying to cover. So I'm going to click near it in a tone that's very similar and hold down the Option or Alt key, and you see you get those crosshairs, and then I'm clicking with my right hand with my mouse, and then I'm letting go of both the Option key and my mouse, and I'm going to simply paint, and that's not working, so I'm going back here and sampling in there. That layer is not transparent, so it is allowing me to clone. Now what is keeping me from cloning that? It's this layer, so I actually have to go in and clone every layer that has that clamp showing on it. You can see that if I had done this right away before I had duplicated any layers, I'd only have to clone it once, and that's what I recommend. Using the clone tool on the very first background layer, or the first duplicate actually. You know how I always like to keep the background perfectly original, just so that you don't end up having to do what I did, and that's fix it on so many different layers. But now we've cloned it out, we can go back to our very top layer, and let's make a brightness contrast. I want to lighten up this background a little bit, so I'm going to way up the brightness. And then I like to use Command I, and what that does is it fills your layer mask with black and gets rid of the effect, so that we can go into our brush and make sure we're on white and just start. We're at 50%. When we're out this far, we could probably go to 100. Make sure you don't go too close to the people. And as you get close to them, you're going to want to go very small. As a matter of fact, you could go over to the magnifying glass, make sure it's on plus, and draw a square, and go back to your brush and work really close. A handy tip is if you press the space bar, can you see the hand? It turns into a hand, and that allows you to pull your image around, so you can go and use your brush here. You can go up very close that way and really brighten areas or paint or whatever it is you're doing in detail, so that when you go back, then that area is completely done. But I'm just going to go ahead and go really quickly just for the sake of this lesson. I'm not going to worry about it being perfect, and you'll see that it's certainly not perfect. But you would be very careful and go very close and make sure that you were not brightening like the edge of their skin or their hair or something like that. Only the background. I like to go around the whole thing with a small brush, and I would use a much smaller brush than this if I was actually working on this image, so that I could be very careful. I'd work up close, and I'm going to go along here. Once I'm done, I'll get a much bigger brush, and then I can go back and paint out the rest of it. I hope you remember that the great thing about working this way is if I was to make a mistake and go into her, super easy to click on that double arrow over here in your color picker and just paint with black again, and then I'll go back to white. Nothing is ever forever. You can go back, you can fix it. There, this is starting to come along. I'm just going to get a big brush. You have a lot of wrinkles in the fabric. You could decide to go back and really work and clean those up, but I don't know, they don't bother me all that much. I think this is turning out much better than it was in the beginning. I might even duplicate this layer. Command J, and then you'll get an even whiter effect back here if that's what you wanted. If you did a really, really careful job painting out the background so that it was perfect, then when you duplicated it, you'd keep that perfect edge. That's if you wanted a really, really white background, but this, to tell you the truth, I think is almost nicer in this image. You're just about done. The last thing I would probably do is go in and do one more brightness contrast, just a little teeny bit for their skin. their eyes. Command I, I'd get rid of the whole thing. I'd get my white brush. I'd have a very low opacity, and I'd use this maybe to just lighten up the faces just a little bit. I'm noticing that this face in the lower left, because it wasn't as much in the light, has a little bit of an orange glow, so I'm actually going to do one last thing, and that's go in and do a photo filter. Probably pick some kind of cooling filter, just a little bit. This is going to look funny until I show you the end result. And say, okay, Command I again, fill that so that we don't get any effect, and then let's paint back at a low opacity and allow through some of that bluing. We're going to blue this just a little, maybe a touch here. If it's too much, you can always go into your opacity and bring it down a hair. It's very subtle, but what we're doing is taking the orange cast out of their skin. If you can see that, I think that's better. I think that we have a little too much up here, so I'm going to go back and knock that down. But we're starting to get there. I think this is really much better than the original. If we turn all these off, you can see that we've corrected a lot of the problems in this image. There we go. The last thing that I would do here is crop it. Remember, that's these stitches like looking, the tool over here. Make sure that you pull it across the entire image and then start playing with these handles. I'd leave the sides where they are, and I would think about where my focus is in this face, this face, and this face. You have a really nice left and right thirds line and top third. You don't want the edge coming and touching the top. You want it either a little far from it, not a huge amount. That's called headroom, meaning that there's too much empty room above the head. And probably not cutting into it because these girls are fully revealed. So for me, it would be somewhere around here. And there we go. Final portrait. Thank you very much for watching, and please check out my other tutorials. Bye-bye.